What happens when America's sweetheart meets daytime television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Julia Roberts sits down for what was supposed to be a lighthearted promotional appearance, only to find herself trapped in a verbal minefield that would leave viewers' jaws on the floor. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two powerhouses collide in the most explosive confrontation The View has ever witnessed. Last night's episode started innocently enough, with Julia Roberts gliding onto the set in a flowing emerald dress that perfectly complemented her radiant smile. The Oscar-winning actress had come to discuss her latest film project, a biographical drama about environmental activism that had been generating significant awards buzz. The audience welcomed her with thunderous applause, completely unaware that they were about to witness television history in the making. "Welcome back to The View, Julia. It's always such a pleasure to have you here," Whoopi began, her signature raspy voice carrying its usual authoritative tone. But even in those opening moments, astute viewers might have detected something different in Whoopi's demeanor, a certain edge that suggested this wouldn't be the typical celebrity love fest The View usually delivered. Julia settled into her chair with practiced grace, her famous laugh already beginning to charm the studio audience. "Thank you so much for having me, Whoopi. It's great to be back." Her voice carried that distinctive warmth that had made her America's sweetheart for decades, but there was something in her eyes, a wariness that suggested she'd heard whispers about what might be coming. The conversation began predictably enough, with Whoopi asking about Julia's new film and her passion for environmental causes. Julia's responses were eloquent and heartfelt, describing her character's journey from corporate executive to environmental warrior. She spoke about the months of research she'd done, meeting with real activists and scientists to understand the urgency of climate change. "It's really about awakening to the reality that we're facing," Julia explained, her hands gesturing expressively. "My character realizes that individual action, while important, isn't enough. We need systemic change, and that means holding corporations and politicians accountable." That's when Whoopi's expression began to shift, almost imperceptibly. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she leaned forward in her chair, a posture that regular viewers would recognize as the prelude to one of her famous confrontations. "That's interesting, Julia, because you talk about holding people accountable, but I have to ask, where was this environmental consciousness when you were flying around the world in private jets for movie premieres? Or when you were promoting gas-guzzling luxury cars in those commercials a few years back?" The studio fell unnaturally quiet. Even the camera operators seemed to sense that something significant was happening. Julia's smile faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered, though her voice took on a slightly defensive tone. "Well, Whoopi, I think we all have to grow and evolve in our understanding. Yes, I've made choices in the past that I might make differently now, but that's what personal growth is about." "Personal growth," Whoopi repeated, her tone laden with skepticism. "Or is it just convenient activism when it serves your career? Because let me tell you what I've noticed. Hollywood loves to lecture the rest of us about climate change, while living in massive mansions and flying private jets to pick up awards for playing environmentalists." The tension in the studio was becoming palpable. Julia's co-hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly not expecting this turn. Joy Behar attempted to lighten the mood with a nervous laugh, but Whoopi's laser focus remained fixed on Julia, who was beginning to show signs of irritation beneath her practiced composure. "I think that's a bit unfair, Whoopi," Julia responded, her voice maintaining its professional warmth but with steel underneath. "I've been using my platform to raise awareness about environmental issues for years. I've donated millions to environmental causes, and I've changed my lifestyle significantly. I drive electric vehicles now. I've made my homes more energy efficient, and yes, I've reduced my flying considerably." "Reduced." Whoopi seized on the word like a predator catching scent. "But not eliminated. You still flew here on a private jet yesterday, didn't you? From your vacation in Italy, if the paparazzi photos are accurate." The audience gasped audibly. This was no longer a friendly chat. It was an ambush, and everyone in the studio knew it. Julia's composure cracked visibly. Her cheeks flushed, and for the first time, her smile completely disappeared. "How I choose to travel is really none of your business, Whoopi. And frankly, I find it pretty hypocritical. Coming from someone who's never met a controversy she wouldn't exploit for ratings. The gloves were officially off. Whoopi's eyes flashed with something between anger and satisfaction. She'd gotten under Julia's skin, and she was just getting started. The cameras captured every micro-expression, every subtle shift in body language as these two titans prepared for battle. Exploiting controversy? Whoopi's voice rose slightly. I'm asking the questions that need to be asked. You come on here, wanting to promote your little environmental movie, while living a lifestyle that contributes more to climate change in a month than most Americans do in a year. And when called out on it, you get defensive and personal. Maybe the real Julia Roberts isn't as sweet as everyone thinks. The studio audience was dead silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Julia's hands clenched slightly in her lap, and her breathing became more visible. She was fighting to maintain her composure, but Whoopi's relentless assault was clearly taking its toll. You know what, Whoopi? Julia's voice was still controlled, but barely. I came here to talk about important issues, and maybe inspire people to care about the planet we're leaving for our children. But clearly, you're more interested in tearing people down than building anything constructive. This conversation says a lot more about you than it does about me. The confrontation was escalating rapidly, and everyone in the studio could feel it. The other co-hosts looked like deer caught in headlights, unsure whether to intervene or let this train wreck continue. The cameras kept rolling, capturing what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in daytime television history. But this was only the beginning. What happened next would push both women past the point of no return, and Julia Roberts would be forced to make a decision that would shock the entertainment world. Whoopi wasn't done. In fact, she was just warming up, and the predatory gleam in her eyes suggested she had been planning this ambush all along. She reached for a stack of papers beside her chair, clearly prepared ammunition for this very moment. Since we're talking about authenticity, Julia, let me share some interesting facts with our viewers. Julia's eyes darted to the papers, and for the first time, real alarm flickered across her face. She straightened in her chair, her defensive posture becoming more pronounced. What are you doing, Whoopi? Just sharing some public information, Whoopi replied with mock innocence, though her tone was anything but innocent. According to carbon footprint tracking services, your household emissions last year were equivalent to what the average American family produces in 15 years. 15 years, Julia. That's from your multiple homes, your travel, your lifestyle choices. The audience gasped again, but this time there were murmurs of disapproval, though it wasn't clear if they were directed at Julia's alleged hypocrisy or Whoopi's ruthless attack. Julia's face went pale, then flushed red. She was clearly struggling to process the ambush nature of this confrontation. Where did you get that information? Julia demanded, her voice rising for the first time. That's private, and frankly, I doubt its accuracy. But even if it were true, what gives you the right to attack me personally when I'm here trying to promote important causes? The right? Whoopi's voice dripped with condescension. The right comes from being tired of Hollywood's endless parade of hypocrites who lecture working families about their carbon footprints while living like environmental disasters themselves. You want to be an activist? Great. But don't insult our intelligence by pretending you're making real sacrifices. Joy Behar finally attempted to intervene, her voice shaky with nervousness. Maybe we should talk about the actual movie. No, Whoopi cut her off sharply, her eyes never leaving Julia. We're having an honest conversation for once. Julia came here to use our platform, and she's going to answer real questions, not just serve up pre-packaged publicity talking points. Julia's hands were visibly trembling now, though whether from anger or shock was unclear. Her famous composure was crumbling in real time, and the cameras captured every moment of her transformation from America's sweetheart to a woman under siege. You know what, Whoopi? You're absolutely right about one thing. This is honest. So, let me be completely honest with you. Julia's voice took on a dangerous edge that few had ever heard from her. You're a bully. You brought me here under false pretenses to ambush me with personal attacks because you think it makes for good television. Well, congratulations. You've shown everyone exactly who you really are. The studio fell into stunned silence. Nobody spoke to Whoopi Goldberg like that on her own show, and everyone knew it. But Julia wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened, and years of pent-up frustration with media ambushes came pouring out. Do you want to talk about hypocrisy? Let's talk about how you sit here every day claiming to support women, claiming to be about empowerment, but the moment a woman disagrees with you or doesn't fit your narrative, you destroy them on national television. You've built a career on tearing other people down, and you hide behind righteous causes to justify your cruelty. Whoopi's face darkened considerably. She wasn't used to being challenged so directly, especially not by someone with Julia's stature and public image. Her voice took on a menacing quality that regular viewers knew meant she was about to unleash her full fury. Cruelty? You think asking tough questions is cruelty? Maybe you've been living in your Hollywood bubble so long that you forgot what real accountability looks like. You came here to sell a movie about environmental activism while living as one of the worst polluters in America, and you think I'm the problem? I think you're a miserable person who gets off on humiliating people. Julia shot back, her voice now fully unleashed from any pretense of politeness. And I think you use your platform irresponsibly to settle personal scores and feed your own ego. This isn't journalism, it's a hit job, and everyone watching knows it. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. The other co-hosts looked mortified. The audience was riveted in horrified fascination, and the production crew was clearly debating whether to cut to commercial. But the confrontation had taken on a life of its own, and neither woman seemed willing or able to back down. Whoopi leaned forward aggressively, her voice rising to match Julia's intensity. A hit job? Lady, you volunteered for this when you decided to play environmental warrior while living like Marie Antoinette. You want to lecture Americans about sacrifice while you sacrifice nothing? Then you better be ready to answer for it. Answer for what exactly? Julia's voice cracked with emotion. For not being perfect? For trying to do better while still being human? I never claimed to be a saint, Whoopi, but at least I'm trying to make a positive difference instead of just tearing people down for entertainment. Positive difference? Whoopi laughed harshly. Writing checks from your mansion doesn't make you an activist, Julia. Real activism requires real sacrifice, not just convenient photo opportunities that help sell movie tickets. The personal nature of the attacks was becoming more vicious with each exchange. What had started as a confrontation about environmental hypocrisy had devolved into something much darker, a brutal character assassination playing out in front of a live studio audience and millions of viewers. Julia stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. The action sent a ripple of shock through the studio. She was breathing heavily, her famous composure completely shattered, and for a moment, it looked like she might say something that would end her career. Instead, she took a deep breath and stared directly into Whoopi's eyes with an intensity that made the seasoned talk show host actually lean back slightly. When Julia spoke, her voice was quiet but filled with barely contained fury. You know what the real tragedy is here, Whoopi? You had a chance to have a meaningful conversation about issues that actually matter. Instead, you chose to make this about destroying me personally because you thought it would be good for ratings. That says everything about your priorities and nothing about mine. The camera zoomed in on Whoopi's face, capturing the moment she realized that her attack had backfired spectacularly. Julia Roberts, America's beloved actress, was standing her ground, and in doing so, she was exposing Whoopi's tactics for what they really were: calculated cruelty, disguised as righteous journalism. But Whoopi wasn't about to admit defeat. Her next words would cross a line that even she had never crossed before. And Julia Roberts' response would create a moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. Whoopi's eyes flashed with something dangerous as she prepared to deliver what she clearly thought would be the killing blow. Her voice dropped to a menacing whisper that somehow carried more threat than if she had shouted. You want to talk about meaningful conversations, Julia? Let's talk about how you've used your sob story about struggling to have children to sell magazines and generate sympathy, all while living a lifestyle that's destroying the planet for the children who are actually here. The studio went dead silent. Even the camera operator stopped moving. Whoopi had just weaponized one of the most painful chapters of Julia's personal life, her well-documented struggles with fertility and her heartbreak over miscarriages that she had bravely shared to help other women feel less alone. The line she had just crossed wasn't just professional. It was profoundly human. Julia's face went completely white, then flushed deep red. Her hands, which had been trembling with anger, now shook with something much deeper, a rage so pure and justified that it seemed to radiate from her entire being. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute moral authority. "How dare you?" The words came out like a prayer and a curse combined. "How dare you use my personal pain, my losses, to score points in your sick little game? You just showed everyone watching exactly who you are, Whoopi Goldberg. You're not a journalist. You're not an advocate. You're just a cruel, bitter person who gets off on hurting people." The transformation in Julia was complete and devastating. Gone was any trace of Hollywood politeness or media training. This was a woman pushed beyond her breaking point, and her response was magnificent in its righteous fury. "I shared my struggles with fertility because I wanted to help other women feel less alone in their pain. But you just turned that into a weapon. You took the most vulnerable, painful part of my life and tried to use it to destroy me on national television. That's not holding someone accountable. That's just evil." Whoopi seemed to realize she had gone too far, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. "I'm just pointing out the contradiction between your public persona and your private actions." "No!" Julia's voice cracked like a whip, cutting Whoopi off mid-sentence. "You don't get to justify what you just did. You crossed a line that decent human beings don't cross, and you did it for ratings. You used my dead children to try to win an argument about carbon footprints. Think about that for a second." The words, "my dead children," hung in the air like a physical presence. Several audience members were visibly crying, and even the hardened television crew looked shaken. Whoopi, for perhaps the first time in her career, looked genuinely rattled. Her mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came out. Julia picked up her purse with hands that were no longer shaking. The fury had crystallized into something cold and controlled. "You know what? I'm done. I'm done pretending this is a real interview. I'm done pretending you're a real journalist. And I'm done subjecting myself to your sadistic little show." She turned toward the cameras, addressing the audience directly with a dignity that made Whoopi's attacks look even more petty in contrast. "To everyone watching, I came here today hoping to talk about environmental issues that affect all of us. Instead, you witnessed something that I hope you never see again on television. No one deserves to have their personal tragedies weaponized for entertainment, regardless of their politics or lifestyle choices." The studio was completely silent, except for the soft sound of Julia's heels as she walked toward the edge of the stage. But she wasn't finished. She turned back one final time, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of someone who had just discovered their own strength in the face of cruelty. "Whoopi, I genuinely hope that someday you find whatever it is you're looking for in all this anger and cruelty, but I won't be part of it anymore. This conversation is over." Whoopi, perhaps realizing the magnitude of her mistake, finally found her voice. "Julia." Wait, but Julia Roberts, America's sweetheart, who had just shown herself to be made of steel, held up her hand without turning around. "No, we're done here. I hope your ratings were worth it." And with that, she walked off the stage with her head held high, leaving behind a stunned studio and a talk show host who had finally gone too far. The cameras captured every step of her exit. The straight spine, the measured pace, the absolute dignity of someone who had been attacked at her most vulnerable point and had emerged stronger for it. As the studio doors closed behind Julia Roberts, Whoopi sat in her chair looking smaller somehow, surrounded by co-hosts who couldn't hide their shock, and an audience that seemed to be processing what they had just witnessed. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, before she finally spoke into her microphone. "We'll be right back after this commercial break." But everyone in that studio knew that some things can't be fixed by a commercial break. Whoopi Goldberg had revealed something ugly about herself on live television, and Julia Roberts had shown the world what real grace under fire looked like. The confrontation that was supposed to destroy Julia's reputation had instead exposed the person behind the attack, and the aftermath would reshape how America viewed both women. The cameras stopped rolling, but the impact of what had just transpired would continue long after the studio lights dimmed. Julia Roberts had walked away from the biggest bully in daytime television, and in doing so, She had won something far more valuable than any argument. She had won her dignity, her integrity, and the respect of everyone who witnessed her remarkable display of strength in the face of cruelty. The View would continue, but it would never be quite the same after the day America's sweetheart became America's warrior, and Whoopi Goldberg learned that some lines should never be crossed.